Today on the program, Ukraine Today. The NATO Secretary General promised 2 layers of security guarantees for Ukraine, including strengthening the armed forces and assistance from the US and Europe. Ukrainian defenders blew up the occupiers who, at the beginning of the full-scale invasion, killed peaceful residents of Bucha. A British volunteer was killed at the front and her body cannot be retrieved. The Russians plan to turn children into specialists in combat UAVs. Azerbaijan is preparing for war with Russia and Aliyev is urgently strengthening the army. My name is Eva Nikolashvili and this is Ukraine Today. And today we'll talk about the most important news of the week. Subscribe and leave a like. Let's get started. Strengthening the armed forces of Ukraine and aid from the US and Europe. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte promised 2 layers of security guarantees for Ukraine. He stated this at a joint press conference with the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. The day before, the NATO Secretary General arrived in Kyiv to discuss the supply of weapons for the defense forces and the development of Ukrainian arms production. Rutte explained that the security guarantees agreement will have 2 levels. The first concerns the signing of a peace agreement between the countries, a ceasefire or 20 points simultaneously, as well as strengthening the armed forces of Ukraine. The second level will relate to guarantees from Europe and the United States, which will deter Russia from future aggression. Thank you. In response to journalists' questions about whether the list of guarantees includes the deployment of NATO troops on Ukrainian territory, Rutte replied that all aspects are currently being discussed at many levels.
As we all know, the Budapest Memorandum and the Minsk agreements also did not lead to real guarantees. So our new guarantees should not be like that. We are working together. Europe, the Ban-NATO, Ukraine and the United States are all working to ensure that the guarantees are of such a level that Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, sitting in Moscow, would never even think of attacking Ukraine again.
Volodymyr Zelensky, for his part, responded to statements from Moscow during his meeting with Rutte regarding the idea that Russia should be among the countries guaranteeing Ukraine's security.
Ukraine needs security guarantees so that we, our children and our grandchildren, can be certain that Russia will not attack us. These are security guarantees against the aggressor. For the sake of Ukraine's security, our sovereignty, our territorial integrity, because the aggressor is Russia. When Russia raises the issue of security guarantees, to be honest, I still don't know who is threatening them. They attacked us and they are on our land. And I don't quite understand what kind of guarantees the aggressor needs. Guarantees of what? So for me, this is still unclear.
Withdrawal from Donetsk and Luhansk regions, renunciation of NATO, and no Western troops on the territory of Ukraine. These, as you might have guessed, are part of the demands of the Russian dictator Putin, which he voiced during his meeting with American President Trump in Alaska. At least that's what Reuters journalists claim. And what about Russia, you might ask? According to the publication, the Kremlin is ready to hand over those parts of the Kharkiv, Sumy, and Dnipropetrovsk regions that Russia temporarily controls. It's interesting. Will Putin dare to voice these demands personally to Zelensky? Next, about what is currently happening around
the ongoing peace negotiations, which are a critical point of discussion, continue to face significant challenges. In this context, Volodymyr Zelensky has consistently expressed his firm position regarding different borders. Ukraine is ready to try with Putin, but only on neutral territory. For example, it could be Europe, Switzerland, Austria or Turkey as NATO-affiliated countries and part of Europe. But one thing the Ukrainian president has decided is that he has no intention of going to Moscow.
For me, a meeting without any personal attacks also means active steps from the Ukrainian side. A meeting in Moscow is out of the question. As for Budapest or Vienna, of course, for me, it's not easy. It's not easy because all European countries are united in supporting Ukraine during this war. And to be honest, Budapest did not help us. I'm not saying that Orban's government was against Ukraine, but it was against helping Ukraine. And I believe it's absolutely fair that Ukraine wants to join the European Union and has every right to do so. This is our sovereign right. And here America is helping us.
Volodymyr Zelensky maintained that without bilateral agreements and without any cases of suspension, a trilateral agreement according to the format is practically impossible. And Moscow is demanding territorial concessions, which, according to the president, is absurd.
He wants to sell us some kind of empty promise that he won't support us. And on the other hand, he says, stay where you are in control. I think it's just his demand, and he knows it won't happen that way. Perhaps that's exactly what he's saying because he doesn't want to stop the war. He set certain conditions so that we can't meet them. To
fix this, the Ukrainian delegation made a map for Washington outlining all the front lines. Overall, Zelensky pointed out that in almost 4 years of war, the Russians have only taken a third of the Donetsk region. And even for that, it took them years. Now,
in terms of territory, they control about 67–69%. So what we're saying is that after almost 4 years of full-scale war, they've only taken 1/3 of the Donbass region. And that's why I said that everything being said about them taking all of Donbass by the end of the year is just talk. So for them to take all of our Donbass, they would need another 4
years. Regarding the Sumy and Kharkiv regions, Zelensky made it absolutely clear. The Russians will not get them, and the regions currently under occupation will soon be liberated. That's when Europe starts looking for a new special mechanism for Ukraine. The initiative was proposed by Giorgia Meloni, the Prime Minister of Italy. Her plan has already been informally dubbed Light NATO, Sayud Auxiliaire de. Kiev's allies demand that military or economic assistance be provided within 24 hours in the event of a new Russian attack. Quickly, cohesively, and without unnecessary bureaucracy. But as for troops, that remains unclear for now.
Either NATO can provide protection to Ukraine, or individual countries will take on such commitments themselves. The best mechanism will be chosen over time. The initiative is modeled after NATO's Article 5, but adapted to current circumstances. Rome aims to act as a bridge builder between the US and Europe, maintaining unity in support of Kyiv.
Zelensky, for his part, addressed the issue. Already, 30 countries could become security guarantors for Ukraine. Some will provide troops, others financial assistance, and still others aviation support. In particular, NATO has made this clear. Russia has no right to block Ukraine's legitimate aspirations to join the alliance.
The US does not consider Ukraine to be part of NATO. This was the case even before President Trump. There are no illusions about this. At the same time, they are, of course, helping Ukraine to integrate with the EU. These are their two positions. That's why they talk about guarantees similar to Article 5 of NATO. But it has to be something strong and effective. Israel has such guarantees, and they work. If there are strong guarantees from the US, they will work for Ukraine as well. But
in fact, a significant portion of the funds for guarantees and security for Ukraine is still not being covered by the Europeans.
I don't think we have that option here. The president, of course, hopes that Europe will decide that, regardless of the form it takes, Europeans must support the validity of your loss. It's their continent, it's their security. And the president has made that clear. They must be supported here.
It turns out that things are starting to drag out for Russia. Europe and America are putting more and more pressure on the Kremlin elite. And the first to crack was the most obvious one, Dmitry Medvedev. His hysterical outburst on social media, complete with insults directed at Emmanuel Macron, looked pathetic and predictable.
The brainless Gallic rooster just can't give up the idea of sending troops to Ukraine. It's been stated clearly, no NATO peacekeepers. Russia will not accept such security guarantees. But the pathetic bird keeps crowing, trying to prove it's the king of the henhouse. Yet, in his attempt to instill fear, Medvedev shows his hand. Russia has nothing left but his drunken fists and amusing statements. If European troops are deployed to Ukraine, Putin's deranged country has no way to respond. Russian threats mean absolutely nothing here. Yes, they'll shout, they'll rant on their televisions, but in reality, they can't influence the situation. European troops ignore all Russian ultimatums and provocations. They stick to their delusions when they see what's really happening. And the Russians can't do anything about it. Medvedev's threatening tone is frankly comical. It was clearly stated that NATO troops are not combatants. But after what has happened, Russia will have to come back again. And that's reflected in their tone and in what they're saying on the streets. So,
in Ukraine, positions are being steadily held step by step. Russia is moving further towards collapse. As the offensives continue, only time will tell. But one thing is already clear. At present, the solution is not in Kremlin offices, but on the battlefield and through cooperation, where Kyiv is increasing its ability to dictate its own terms.
On the temporarily occupied territory of Luhansk region, occupiers who, at the beginning of the full-scale invasion, killed peaceful residents of Bucha were blown up. According to the main intelligence directorate of Ukraine in the Luhansk region, the war criminals were operating as a mobile air defense group covering a military repair base located nearby. The detonation occurred in the yard of one of the houses where 6 Russian invaders were present along with their equipment. As a result of the explosion, a van loaded with ammunition and 2 pickups with machine guns were blown into the air. 3 occupiers were killed and 2 are in extremely critical condition. Meanwhile, more and more information is emerging about the new Ukrainian cruise missile, Flamingo. Here is what is currently known about.
It is important to note that this particular aspect, or perhaps the entire concept, is a crucial element that warrants further consideration and detailed examination in the ongoing discussion. Photos of the new Ukrainian long-range Flamingo missile have been published.
The Ukrainian-made Flamingo missiles have a range of over 3,000 kilometers, and they are already in serial production. Production can be seen in the workshop of one of the country's leading defense companies, Firepoint, at an undisclosed location in Ukraine.
The caption under the photo states that it was taken on August 14th in the workshop of the defense company, Firepoint. The photo shows the missiles in the workshop already prepared for shipment. It seems that the Flamingo is already in serial sales. Ukrainian officials in the defense sector have long mentioned that Ukraine's defense industry is preparing a long-awaited surprise for the Russians. And it seems that the Flamingo is exactly the surprise that was being talked about. According to local analyses, the missile is very easy to operate, and that's exactly what Ukraine needs right now.
This is great news. The missile is actually simple. It can't be compared to the likes of the Storm, Shadow, Scalp, and so on. But in this case, we don't need a very complex guidance system. Most modern American or British missiles have a visual guidance system that can be displayed on an infrared image even when different scenarios are used. In this case, we don't need that. Pavel Narozhny, military expert.
All the known facts indicate that the so-called Flamingo is in fact already familiar. The FP-5 cruise missile from the Millennium Group. The specifications, missile sales, and their descriptions are identical.
The company determined that it could sell more than 50 units of this type per month. Such rapid cooperation was achieved due to economic considerations, where for mass sales, complex design features like containerized loading and folding launchers had to be sacrificed. This price is for a long-range pre-order which takes the missile 20-40 minutes. Nevertheless, given the capabilities of the FP-5, this is quite unexpected. The company also stated that the missile uses satellite navigation resistant to electronic warfare, along with an inertial guidance system. According to Defense Express,
the Flamingo warhead is just a single unit, which is twice as powerful as the Tomahawks. Most importantly, it is designed for mass production. Russia systematically tries to destroy Ukraine's defense industry, and Ukraine must respond in kind, focusing on degrading the Russian industrial complex.
This is happening on a large scale, and we see that most of these factories can be hit with cheap drones that fly not at the... As of this moment, the governmental authorities in Kyiv, the capital city of Ukraine, have not yet released or issued any official pronouncements, public declarations, or formal statements concerning the ongoing situation. This means there has been no definitive word or public stance articulated by the Ukrainian government on the matter in question, leaving observers without a clear indication of their position or response regarding these developments.
It's about the newly developed long-range Flamingo missile, which is a significant advancement. In fact, I think...
In Donetsk region, 69-year-old volunteer from the United Kingdom, Annie Lewis Murphy, was killed. This happened as a result of a strike by a Russian drone. This was reported by Western media, citing a report from the Kramatorsk District Police Department. Annie Lewis Murphy worked for a humanitarian organization founded in the United Kingdom. At the end of May, she traveled to Ukraine from Poland in a car loaded with humanitarian aid. She crossed the border on June 4th. According to the organization and based on police reports, on June 11th, Annie drove onto the Bakhmut highway. The British woman parked her car on the roadside when a Russian drone struck the vehicle. She sustained injuries incompatible with life, according to the law enforcement report. Her body still cannot be retrieved due to ongoing active combat. The British woman's relatives have appealed to the authorities to obtain a death certificate. The aggressor country plans by 2030 to turn children, including abducted Ukrainian children, into at least 1 million specialists in combat UAVs. This is part of the process of militarizing Russian education. All the details are in the report.
The British intelligentsia reports that the deeply shocked country of Russia plans to turn to military specialists to train approximately 1 million children, a move that has raised significant concerns. The intelligentsia, which relies solely on appropriate sensors in its development, says that such training is an important step toward further militarization of Russian education. This trend has intensified since Russia completely lost Ukraine in 2022.
Much will accordingly depend, first and foremost, on which specific age group this particular methodology will be applied to. And accordingly, current prevailing trends are markedly different for various demographic groups, age groups across the demographic spectrum. Starting from, kindergarten, where they plan to test lectures on important topics for teenagers, which they are required to practice actively, taking place in aviator-equipped facilities.
The percentage of Kremlin involvement with drones in schools is not very high. During the war in Ukraine, there were about 40,000 schools in Ukraine, in Russia. They plan to train future drone pilots in only 500 schools and 30 other colleges with practical training centers.
Apparently, this whole story with drones, of course, might have some benefits, simply because kids love gameplay. And at first glance, a drone is like a complete and immersive gameplay experience.
But in the real world, about 2,500 instructors are ready for training, but the effectiveness of the training does not have to be high, if only because
it is widely believed, and indeed, if Ukraine were to decide to completely give up, which at my current age is an utterly impossible scenario, then yes, the conflict would undoubtedly cease. The question is, what will he do next? And here, the most important thing for him, and he formulated this, let me recall, even before the war, is to identify all the armed enemies of the Russian Federation who have long remained on the European continent. So, in other words, he wants to keep the post-Soviet countries under Moscow's control. Plus, ideally, he would like to have influence over the former socialist countries as well. In fact, this is exactly what his demand is about, as I recall, namely to roll back NATO's presence to where it was in 1997.
Back then, just like in the USSR, Putin is also creating organizations where children are kept. The focus in these organizations is on military education. Yes, in fact, like everyone else, the Yunarmia was created where children, because Russians and those from the temporarily occupied territories are taught to fight practically from infancy.
So why did the USSR even persist? Because the teachers and even most of the rural bigwigs didn't care about the communist idea. And in this sense, people who are now all together don't care about this idea either. And so, well, there's a small chance that the Yunarmia might not be fully drawn in yet. All of Putin's higher-ups from
unknown with boots, plus additional UAVC training and other types of so-called military languages. The cultivation of the spirit of the enemy Mangly youths helping. Putin continues waging.
Aliyev ordered the country to prepare for a possible war. Most likely we're talking about Russia. The point is that this statement was made precisely against the backdrop of worsening relations with Moscow and threats from Russian propagandists to launch a new special military operation in the South Caucasus. During a meeting with residents of the city of Kalbajar, the leader of Azerbaijan stated that the country must be ready for war at any moment and immediately spoke about strengthening the army. According to Aliyev, they have strengthened the army on the Caspian Sea and in other regions by increasing the number of special forces units and by acquiring modern drones, new artillery systems, and upgraded combat aircraft. Baku is also expecting deliveries of new aircraft.
We must be ready for war at any moment. Because the way things are going in the world, it's impossible to predict what will happen tomorrow. The guarantor of our security is ourselves, the state, the people, and our armed forces. So if someone with a sick mind decides to provoke Azerbaijan, I think they will regret it once again. And from now on, we will live as a victorious nation and a victorious state.
Clergy of the Russian Orthodox Church are spying in European countries for the Kremlin. Here's how it works. The flower of the church. Russian priests set up NATO countries' military bases, gather information, and pass it on to Moscow. Details in the report.
The expulsion of the Russian Orthodox Church from Ukraine. This is one of the demands put forward by the Kremlin, as voiced by the Russian dictator at the meeting in Anchorage. One might think that Putin is hoping for the preservation of this institution, but in reality, these Russian Orthodox Church parishes located near military bases are just a cover for the FSB, allowing them to monitor and continue their operations. As proof, the only person Putin met with in Anchorage besides Trump was the Archbishop. Aliyev Sitka in Alaska.
We had a meeting with him just before my recent trip to this location here. He personally told me in great detail about how the ancient and venerable Orthodox Christian Church initially began its establishment right here in this very location. He mentioned that he had also previously visited this location, having attended a religious service there. He spoke about his research and promises with great enthusiasm and genuine affection, recounting everything with remarkable warmth and deep meaning, hope.
The icons made their way to Alaska from Kirill. What was provided by the public office with their assistance is at the disposal of any host. The archpriest receives the faithful with joy and blesses them after the Russian war criminal has kissed the icons. I'm
very, very grateful.
In the fourth year of the full-scale war, GRU agents continue to operate under the guise of a religious network in NATO and beyond. Moreover, analysts say that the Russians choose the most familiar places for espionage, a church on the heights of the prominent city of Westeros. In 2013, this plot of land was acquired by Rosatom. The site for construction was allocated by Lars Kaltsebi, the senior chief officer of the National Construction Service Board. The facility was built by 2019, with further development by Rosatom, but officially the church retained its identity. By the way, according to information from investors, the Russians decided to settle in Swedino. This is the very place with the longest stretch, featuring a strategic border along Lake Malaren, as well as the secular army, the general staff in Enköping, and a military communications hub.
The Russians did not choose this place just because of the distance. Near this location is a Westinghouse power plant which continues to supply nuclear energy. The distance between these sites is only 4.22 kilometers. Even closer, just 500 meters from this site, there is another strategic facility, Västerås Flagplats Airport. 6 kilometers from the church, there is a thermal power plant and the headquarters of the energy company Mälarenergi AB. And almost 5 kilometers from this city, there is a metallurgical
plant belonging to ABB. Pavel Makarenko, this priest, was recognized with a certificate of distinction from the ZAS for his work. At that time, the priest was the head of a secular company, which was managed by the Russian director Gerasimov. By the way, Gerasimov oversees the entire network of so-called secular projects in Sumy, and immediately he became a public figure. This church in Westeros is as unprotected as a military facility. Only one partner agreed to speak with journalists, but even she quickly withdrew. An unknown
person. We don't get involved in politics. We are focused on the Arok, that's all. There are many nationalities here. Greek, Ukrainian, not just Russians. We're chatting in English.
What are you doing? I'm doing an interview. Stop. Don't talk.
Journalists analyzed dozens of ROC churches in Sweden, Norway, Finland, as well as in other European countries. And everywhere, it's the same pattern. Russians choose simply the perfect spots for surveillance and organizing sabotage. For example, in the Czech Republic, right next to an ammunition depot where, in 2014, Russia's special services blew up the warehouses. There, Russian special services blew up the warehouses. 2 ROC facilities are located nearby. Accordingly, there is only one exception where local authorities have stopped the assets of the Russian church on its territory.
The town of Turka. After 2002, the Dormition Church of the Younger Father of God operated there, and its abbot was Hegumen Nikita. Ole Stanislavovich Dobronravov, a close associate of Gundyaev and an expert in church law. In 1997, he worked in the Department of External Christian Development, and in 2000, he was ordained as a monk. The metropolitan leadership of this church summoned the local authorities of Turku on August 1st, 2022, due to the ongoing war in Ukraine, as well as the naval fleet of Pansio and its crew, the port of Turku, the regional state administration of northern Finland, and the Russian consulate general in Turku. Everyone was present.
But even after the church service ended, the priest found himself in Stockholm. And in fact, the practice of propagandists exploding in Kasahi, who often do not specify that Russia is attacking Ukraine, and often also claim that they do not work for intelligence services, is not lacking near Turku, Finland. Hundreds of eyes from Moscow are watching everything that happens in Ukraine and Scandinavia.
That's all for today. Thank you for being with us. We read your comments and feel your support. Strength to the Ukrainian defenders. Glory to Ukraine. Subscribe, leave a like, and...
Well, it looks like our time together has come to an end for now. We've had a great session, and I'm really looking forward to seeing you again in the near future. Until then, take care and goodbye.